I'm going to show you the bias tape step, just so that when you are done that you can do this. If you don't have time to do it today, not a big deal. Once you have all 4 of your signatures together, you'll notice that you should have a group of holes here between D and E, like you have a little string between D and E, and then your little string between A and B, okay? These holes are 1/2 inch apart. Conveniently, this bias tape, this cloth tape, is also 1/2 inch wide. So what you're going to do, what you might find helpful, is just take your little needle here. You can do this with like a little piece of your waxed linen thread still on your needle. And you can kind of like tie a little knot on the end like that. And you can use that to help thread your bias tape through those things there. I'm just poking my needle through the end of my bias tape. You guys see how I'm doing this? So that it's like I'm fishing here with the bias tape. You kind of see how I've got that going on? So I'm going to go through just the threads. I'm going to go through the threads on between, like, let's say this is D and E, right? With my needle, I'm pulling and pulling, and I'm sort of pulling, you know, and this knot might get in your way, but you know, this might work. You might just be able to stuff the bias tape through those little loops of thread, or you might find the needle technique helpful. It's completely up to you, but you're basically just pulling the bias tape through those little loops. Whew, I stitched these really snug so they're not wanting to go. There you go, I'm through the first loop. You can space it out if you need to, if it's too hard to get them all through all in one go. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. Basically, you're just trying to wiggle that bias tape through the loop. And if this is easier to do just with your hands, then do it that way. You don't have to, oh, see, and I just pulled all the way through the, I pulled through the, my knot pulled through the bias tape. You're trying to make it so that the bias tape sits flat. This is basically what you're trying to do, guys. You're just trying to get the bias tape through those little ends there. If the needle thing doesn't work out, don't worry about it, because that was an idea that may or may not have been the best. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, not a huge deal. You can just use your fingernail or something to stuff it underneath that little loop of waxed thread, whichever works for you. Try to make sure that the bias tape is sitting flat though, and that it doesn't get folded under that loop. Yeah, that's okay. This cloth tape is what's going to hold your signatures into your book. We're going to use these to do that. So there, you've got them bound together with your cloth tape on one edge here. And then we're going to do the same on the other. I'm showing you right now. I showed you once up here. So you're basically just between holes D and E on the outside of your signatures, there's that little thread. And between holes A and B, there's that little thread. Those little pieces of thread are 1/2 inch long because those 2 holes.
Which side do we do it? Like,
both. You're doing it on. Doesn't matter because it's the same on, well, I like to have the smooth side facing outward, but I mean, it's up to you. It doesn't really matter. As long as it doesn't get like folded and bunched on the inside. Here's another way that you could try to get these through. If you're trying to figure out how to get your bias tape through that loop or underneath that little loop, you could kind of just like use your needle to sort of just guide it under the loop. You don't have to actually thread your bias tape onto the needle in any way or shape or fashion. It does take a little finagling, but you will get it done. You just, when it looks like this, when it gets folded like that, you want to try to move it back and forth a little bit to kind of flatten that bias tape out so it sits smooth. I'm not sure why they call it bias tape. Oh, probably because it's cut on the bias.